Is Kashmir returning to conflict? For nearly 80 years, Kashmir has been one of the most significant disputes in the world. However, in recent years, things seem to have calmed. That was until a devastating attack on a group of tourists left almost 30 dead. Since then, tensions have rapidly escalated between the two countries, with reports even emerging of gunfire along the line of control. So, what exactly is the Kashmir issue all about, and could it be about to flare up again with potentially disastrous consequences? Hello and welcome. If you're new to the channel, my name is James Ker-Lindsay, and here I take an informed look at international relations, conflict, security, and statehood. In international relations, what sometimes seem like relatively small incidents can go on to have global effects. What may start out as a very localised event can spin off into much greater confrontations, potentially with devastating consequences. Around the world, few disputes have been as long-lasting and disruptive as the conflict between India and Pakistan over Kashmir. For decades, it's been a fundamental bone of contention between these two countries, leading to 4 major conflicts. At the same time, it's been home to a long-running insurgency as Muslim militants have taken on the Indian state. But in recent years, things appeared to have calmed. However, any illusion of peace has now been shattered. A serious terrorist attack has led to fears of a renewed insurgency. More to the point, as India vows retaliation, many worry that a new conflict may yet erupt with Pakistan. Kashmir lies in South Asia on the south slopes of the Himalaya mountain range. Altogether, the area, which is now de facto partitioned between India, Pakistan and China, is around 220,000 square kilometres or 86,000 square miles. Of this, India controls around 55%, Pakistan 35% and China the remaining 10%. Altogether, the population is almost 20 million. Of this, around 13 million live in India and 6 million in Pakistan. The Chinese-controlled part, which was ceded by Pakistan to China in 1963 but is still claimed by India, is sparsely populated and mainly inhabited by military personnel. Kashmir has a long and rich history. However, our story really begins in the 19th century when it emerged as one of the 500 or so princely states within British-controlled India. This lasted until August 1947, when British rule finally ended and the country was partitioned between the Hindu-majority Dominion of India and the Dominion of Pakistan, a separate Muslim homeland formed to the north and east. At this point, the princely states were given a choice to either become independent or else join with India or Pakistan. While most of them chose to join with one of the two countries, often under extreme pressure, a few held out. This included Kashmir. As a Muslim-majority state with a Hindu ruler, it opted for independence. However, its hopes for statehood were short-lived. A little over a month after the end of British rule, it was attacked by Pakistani tribal groups. As a result, its leader requested to join India. But as Indian troops flew in to fight off the attacks, a full-scale war erupted between India and Pakistan. On the 1st of January 1948, India presented the issue to the United Nations Security Council, which ultimately agreed that the matter should be resolved by a referendum in Kashmir. However, by the time a UN-monitored ceasefire took effect, Kashmir had been divided. Although both countries formally claimed the entire territory, Pakistan now controlled the northern and western third, while India secured the remainder to the south. Over the following years, tensions persisted between India and Pakistan. This culminated in another war in 1965, followed by a third one 6 years later in 1971. It was at this point that the parties reached a formal accord, the Simla Agreement. In addition to establishing the line of control between them, thereby effectively recognising each other's control over the regions they held, they agreed not to escalate tensions and undertook to resolve their dispute peacefully through negotiations. Although the similar agreement essentially ended the era of direct confrontation between India and Pakistan, it marked the beginning of a new phase in the Kashmir conflict. By the 1980s, tensions on the ground in Kashmir were increasing, driven by political disillusionment, economic marginalisation and a broader sense of alienation. Kashmir's Muslim-majority population began to step up their calls for either independence or union with Pakistan. All this came to a head with state elections in 1987. Amidst allegations of vote rigging by the ruling Indian Congress Party, many young Kashmiris began to turn to violence, sparking a full-fledged insurgency. Over the next decade, the fighting steadily intensified as India launched a major crackdown on the uprising. This led to accusations of serious human rights abuses. In addition to extrajudicial killings and disappearances, many thousands were arrested under sweeping legislation, often facing torture while in custody. Meanwhile, acting with legal impunity, security forces often subjected entire villages to violent searches, frequently resulting in serious injuries and significant damage to property. Meanwhile, as India accused Pakistan of supporting the insurgency, a claim that the Pakistani government strongly denied, tensions re-emerged between the two countries. This led to another major confrontation in 1999, the fourth in half a century. I hope you're finding this useful. If so, please do give it a like and perhaps subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks so much, and now back to the video. Since the turn of the millennium, Kashmir has remained a significant source of internal and external tension in India. In 2008, Kashmiri militants launched a high-profile terrorist attack in Mumbai that resulted in 166 deaths and nearly 300 injuries. More recently, the situation escalated again in 2019 when the Indian government revoked Kashmir's autonomy that had been put in place when it joined India 70 years earlier. Instead, it now divided it into two new federal units, Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh. While the Indian government insisted that this would further development and better integrate Kashmir with the rest of the country, many observers saw the step as a means for India to consolidate its permanent sovereignty over the part of Kashmir under its control, as well as to pave the way for further demographic changes. As a result, protests erupted on both sides of the line of control. However, the Indian government under Prime Minister Narendra Modi remained undeterred. Cracking down on opposition, it instituted a strict security lockdown. In addition to carrying out mass arrests, including of local political leaders, it imposed a communications blackout and restricted movement. Since then, there's been a noticeable decline in the amount of insurgent activity, as well as a drop in the recruitment of new militants. At the same time, public protests have also become less frequent. For its part, the Indian government argues that this is down to a combination of factors, such as intensified counterinsurgency operations, improved intelligence, enhanced border management, and a heavy security presence. However, human rights groups and Kashmiri activists contend that the reduction in violence has come at the expense of civil liberties, including ongoing arbitrary detentions and widespread surveillance. But while things appear to be relatively calm, at least under the surface, the situation remained tense. This came to international attention on the 22nd of April when militants attacked a group of tourists in the Baisaran Valley, a popular tourist destination in Indian-administered Kashmir. According to reports, the insurgents, who were dressed in military-style uniforms and heavily armed, killed at least 28 people, including 25 Indians, 1 Nepali and 2 tourists from the United Arab Emirates, and injured over 20 others. Since then, a group called the Resistance Front has claimed responsibility for the attack. An offshoot of the Pakistan-based militant group Lashkar-e-Taiba, it said that the attack was carried out to oppose population changes in the region, including the settlement of over 85,000 non-Kashmiris in the area. All this has had significant effects. Condemning the attack, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has vowed to bring the perpetrators to justice. At the same time, India has taken steps against Pakistan, which it accuses of being behind the incident. These have included suspending an important treaty governing the management of the Indus River, revoking visas for Pakistani nationals, and withdrawing diplomatic staff from its High Commission or embassy in the Pakistani capital, Islamabad. Meanwhile, Pakistan, which has strongly denied any involvement in the attack, has criticised the Indian actions, warning that any move to interfere with water supplies would be considered an act of war. As a result, the incident has led to a further escalation of tensions, once again raising concerns about potential military conflict between the two nuclear-armed neighbours. But even if things don't go that far, the attack has raised fears that it may herald a new phase in the insurgency. But what makes all this potentially so troubling is that a return to violence is likely to lead to prolonged instability with little, if any, chance of a successful peace process. Over the years, the Kashmir conflict has seen numerous peace efforts. None have ever worked. More to the point, there's little indication that any new effort would be successful. The Kashmir conflict is one of the few issues in international relations that seemingly defies settlement. Broadly speaking, the options can be categorised into three groups. First, there's the sovereignty option, which means ceding the region to India or Pakistan. Secondly, there's independence. And thirdly, there's some form of autonomy. However, each of these has its challenges. A referendum on sovereignty is now considered unfeasible, as India would oppose it, knowing that it would likely lose. As for independence, this is complicated by the ethnic and religious diversity that could make an independent state unstable. It would also be opposed by both India and Pakistan, both of which fear territorial loss and the consequent internal anger from their nationalists. Even variants such as independence for a limited part of the territory, such as the Kashmir Valley, raise questions of acceptance and viability. Finally, autonomy would involve shared control while allowing internal self-rule. Once seen as a promising middle ground proposed by at least one senior Pakistani leader, this idea has lost traction in recent years, especially since India revoked Jammu and Kashmir's autonomy in 2019 and divided it into two parts. But any talk of an eventual settlement is still far on the horizon. Even establishing a peace process seems nearly impossible at this stage. Despite calls for dialogue, deep mistrust and political resistance in both India and Pakistan prevent progress. Meanwhile, international involvement remains minimal, especially as India insists on bilateral talks and rejects outside mediation. At the same time, the UN Security Council remains firmly detached from the issue. Indeed, it's only held one informal discussion on the issue since 1965. While countries like the United Kingdom and the United States support a peaceful settlement that reflects Kashmiri aspirations, they refrain from direct involvement. And it's for all these reasons that the Kashmir dispute remains one of the few global conflicts that elude resolution, even on a theoretical level. More importantly, when one considers the history of the conflict, the clear risk of escalation, and the fact that India and Pakistan are both nuclear powers, it quickly becomes clear why Kashmir is not only amongst the world's most intractable conflicts, but arguably one of the most dangerous. And all this explains why this latest attack is particularly worrying. In such a volatile environment where there seems almost no chance of reaching an eventual settlement, even seemingly limited incidents can have significant and far-reaching effects. I hope you found that useful. If so, here are some more videos that you might find helpful. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.